Hi, and thanks for stopping by. I'm Paul, this is Resurgence Training, and today we're breaking down some lower body movements. So I had a client, Tom, in for an assessment. Tom's had some pain into his left knee, and we wanted to screen his lower body movements. So we looked at single leg and bilateral, and we found some interesting things. I'm not going to give it away, but you're going to learn some interesting cues around how to create space in the hips in what we call external rotation. And we're going to see what I see as a very common mistake, often missed by coaches when helping their clients, and that is throwing the knee out to the side. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe, share, and tune in for regular content. Enjoy! So we're looking at a single leg hip hinge for Tom here, and the first thing we notice is kind of how off balance he is. Loading that standing leg is pretty tricky for him. So let's look at the freeze frame. We can see a bit of a lean out to the side, and then the hips have clearly hiked across. That left hip is internally rotated ever so slightly. Okay, let's look at this rep. The main difference is that Tom is now supported against the wall. He's able to load his leg better, and look at that stacking now. A nice straight line from hip down to the ankle. We can see the hips are nice and level. He's not internally rotated as well. So what was the difference? The difference was that support against the wall. So we've got to help Tom get stronger in that standing single leg position before we get him away from the wall. That's our starter for 10. When we switch to the side angle again, we can see this little hip hike happening. Tom also lets his shoulder go below his hip, which is never going to be good for this loaded position. So we can see that angle clearly there. This also causes the hips to hike, which is going to flash up in just a second here. So this internally rotated position is not a happy spot for us to be for Tom. So here's what I'm going to help him to do. Tom had a right pec tear, and he's got a lot of compression down through his rib cage. That narrowing of space from shoulder to hip via the rib cage causes us to compensate in other places. For Tom, most noticeably in the single leg position, it's by that little bit of internal rotation. So you can see with my hands, I'm encouraging him to lengthen that space from rib to hip, and I'm encouraging him to stay long through there as he hinges over. The result, as we can see for this rep, is a much more level hip hinge with that little bit of wall support to help. Good. When we switch to the other leg, I'm going to give you the front view because we'll see the same thing. So as he hits the bottom here, we can clearly see that the shoulders are a little bit unlevel. That right shoulder has come way outside the right leg, which means we've shifted. The spine's twisted a little bit, and we've got that internal rotation piece happening again. So here's another example of what we're going to do to help with this. As Tom comes back up to the top position, I'm going to encourage him to get a bit closer to the wall for that support. We're going to help him load his standing leg. We're creating a little bit of external rotation through the foot and the knee, and I'm encouraging him to lengthen through his rib cage. This next little piece is the big secret. Imagine you've got a stick in front of your hips here. I'm going to encourage Tom to lift up and fold over that stick. That's going to take his hamstrings and get them a little bit longer and give him more space to hinge. So the hips are a bit more level, the shoulders a bit more in line, and we've got work to do from here. So what we're interested in is the bottom position here for Tom's squat. Look at the coverage on the calves. We can see the right is covered and the left is not. When we look at the hip height, we can see that the right hip is higher than the left. This is indicative of a shift. So let's watch these reps again. We're going to pause initially as he takes off. Look at the big shift into the hip here. If we start in this position, we're going to finish in this position. So number one for priority for Tom is figuring out how to get him to start right so that he can finish right. So next up we went to the ATG split squat, and before we actually watch the movement, I want you to look at this setup position. So part of the reason why the single leg hip hinge was so challenging for Tom, I believe, is because his hip flexors are tight. So this starting position can kind of give us an idea of why I think that. So look at the standing leg. The left leg is in an internally rotated position. Look at the angle of the foot. It's a little bit pigeon-toed, and we can see that sort of pulling the hip round into internal rotation. What that highlights a little bit is a lack of mobility or flexibility into the hip flexors, the front of the right hip. So if that right hip is tight, it's going to be really hard for Tom to put that hip back into extension. And in turn, he's going to internally rotate the front hip to move away from that. So we just want to keep that in mind as we watch these clips and as we watch these movements. It's not always because of a lack of external rotation in the front foot in these single leg movements. It's a combination of both hips, front and back, and checking on both sides. Okay, well, let's watch the rep here. Before he starts, I just twist his hips a little bit more square. Hopefully you can see that. And then we let Tom continue on. I'm going to pause it very, very quickly here. Have a gander or a little look at the left hip and the foot and ankle. We can immediately see a little hike into the hip. The left rib cage looks a bit crunchy, and the knee and the ankle are in a bad spot. Tom's going to finish his rep here quite early. He runs out of space, and he comes back up to the top. So let's see what we do to give him a bit of help. The first thing I should have done is I should have corrected his foot position and helped him turn it out a little bit. That would have made the biggest difference. What I am doing here though is I'm helping him create a little bit of external rotation. I'm encouraging him to do so from the foot and the ankle and from the knee, and I'll talk about that in some later videos. So Tom sets off on his rep, and we can see he gets a heck of a lot further down. The heel comes up a little bit more and he's able to get deeper into that position. The knee definitely tracks a little bit better as well. I do want you to pay attention to a very important component here, and this is something that I think is missed quite often. Look at the angle from Tom's knee to his hip and look at what he does with his groin. Essentially, he throws the knee out as a compensation for a lack of external rotation in the hip. So we're going to see as he comes forward, just look at the crunchiness into the left hand. Okay, with the freeze frame, I want us to pay particular attention to the angle from the ankle to the knee and then from the knee into the hip, into the groin. So guys, this is something that I see happening an awful lot, and it's something that's not often picked up on. There is a compensation happening for true external rotation at the hip, and it occurs from people throwing the knee out. Now, the cue that we received a good few years ago from the supple leopard Kelly Starrett was this concept of screwing the feet into the ground. That incorporates a lot of different joints and a lot of different components. It's not just about the hip and the knee angle. If you have say an internally rotated tibia or an internally rotated hip, that can end up with you just sort of throwing the knees out to the side and flaring the groin. That puts a lot of tension into the adductors and into the inside of the hip, and that is not what we're looking for. It's going to be a big inhibiting factor in your ability to get down deep into a squat or into a lunge. It's also going to consistently put pressure onto the knee and into the adductors, and that's not what we want. So we've got to help Tom learn how to strengthen those adductors. They're going to be weak now, but also how to truly create some external rotation through the hip, and that'll be part of the secret to improving these positions for him. It's not just about his inability to access them, it's about his inability to truly understand how to create that space. That's the education component that will come in. As he gets stronger and better into those positions, we're going to see that improve significantly. We've let the video run there as we switched over to the other side. This side's actually a little bit better despite the right ankle actually being a little bit more restricted. And what we see is Tom's actually able to get a little bit more extension into the left hip, which in turn finds it easier for him to find his balance. But we can see here he doesn't throw the knee out as far to the side on this leg. The shoulders are a bit more level, everything's a bit less crumpled up, and so this is a bit more of a standard for him to work towards. This was the second side we worked on. He'd had a bit of coaching, but if we can teach him how to externally rotate his hip without throwing the knee out to the side, how to keep a strong foot arch in both feet, we're going to see significant improvements for him and reduction in pain, hopefully.
Alright folks, second part to the adduction of the groin squat series. Here's what I'm talking about. If I throw my knees out to the side, instead of creating external rotation, I'm going to run out of space as I squat. So watch these two reps. First rep, I'm throwing out using the adductors in the groin. As I sit down, my weight's all on the outside of my feet, and I struggle for power. Second rep, I'm using my glutes. I'm externally rotating, and I'm pulling myself down into the squat. It looks similar, but look at the angle from the hip to the knee. This is too wide, this is perfect. So don't throw your knees out, screw them into the ground.